Hey everyone, we are excited to launch the Bright Mind subscription. Unlimited access to all of our CE courses, webinars, and expert speakers all in one place.
And for a limited time for the month of December, you can get 50% off. Normally $299 a year, now just $149 for your first year.
That's unlimited CE on your schedule for half price.
Head over to psych2practice.com and click sign up, and the discount is already applied. We look forward to seeing you there. And as always, be well, stay psyched. This episode of the Psych to Practice podcast is sponsored by PAR, where psychological assessments meet innovation.
PAR has been the gold standard in the industry for over 45 years and has empowered professionals in education, healthcare, private practice, and research with trusted tools and cutting-edge solutions.
Discover more at parinc.com. Again, that is parinc.com. Creating connections, changing lives. Hello and welcome to the Psych to Practice podcast, your one-stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insights from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me as always is
Ray Christner.
And, Ray, we recently have recorded our episode surrounding finding the fit in terms of our client caseload and the populations we're working. And you shared it was a decent bit of the conversation talking about how we as clinicians really explore our own competency and how do we progress and grow and finding our trajectory of how do we take coming out of, our programs and then really come into our own and really trying to say, what are the skills or what are the areas I want to better myself in? And, we've gotten a bit of feedback from that. And I think it's be an interesting conversation for today for us to dive a little bit more into that, not just having it be a, branch off of another episode, but really giving it its own due here.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic, I think, again, it's one of those things that we really don't talk about in grad school or, most of my experience with it came from more like supervision or mentorship, where I had people in my life who kind of helped me kind of start thinking about it. So, yeah, but I don't know. I mean, did you ever have was that part of your training or?
Not really ever a part of training. I would say the closest to it was an encouragement from an academic advisor of exploring courses that would be of interest or that would feel okay, what are the, whether it's modalities or skills, to be able to kind of do that. But it wasn't really framed as, how do you kind of lay the groundwork for you as a clinician? And a part of it was also, I appreciate a lot about my program, but the direction wasn't there. So there was kind of this aimlessness with it.
Yeah. I think I hear that a lot from people, from other professionals where they feel it's so much you got to cover in grad school just to, have the generalist abilities to get licensed and all of that. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a fun topic. And I mean, as we kind of talked about last time, I mean, something for me, it's always on my mind and kind of a part of, my professional development plan, which has been, really, I think an area that's kept me interested in the field. It never gets kind of boring. So, so maybe let's kind of start out talking about ways to identify even what to do, what to specialize in.
Yeah. And, I think that has to really, there needs to be some intention behind it. So I don't want it to be, let me look at, this list of courses or, training workshops and, I'll throw a dart and see whatever it lands on. And, I guess that's what I'm going to be doing. You can, I guess, but
right.
I don't know that you're going to get the trajectory and building off this process here. But I think, as you're going through and you're just in your practice and this maybe early experiences and looking at pattern recognition, I would say, and look, who are the individuals that are coming into your practice and what are their, what are the concerns? What are those pieces that they're coming and seeking support for? And what are the areas that feel like they're out of reach or they're unfamiliar for you with that? And, if it's one client who's coming in, okay. But if we have 3, 5, 10, 20, that are coming in and making comments or sharing that there's this gap for them. And, that might be an area, like if you're planning on staying in that area, there's a need. And I don't think that's the only piece, but I think really looking for that pattern recognition of saying, is there going to be a need or a value within your community for you to pursue this? Because, if not, then, I think it's wonderful to learn, but we might not really be getting the practice to really develop a level of specialization or expertise or whatever language we want to use there with it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, to specialize in something that you're never going to see anyone or work with anyone that, maybe that doesn't quite make sense to do. But I like the idea of emerging patterns. I shared a little bit of that last episode. It's one of the areas I focused on early in my career was Prader-Willi, and it was out of need. And it's a rather rare condition. So it's something where, you're not going to see a ton of people, but once you develop that expertise and that specialty, then I think people tend to find you. I think that's kind of part of it. I like that you mentioned, though, to kind of jump back for a second about not just throwing a dart at the dartboard with our eyes closed. And I think that's important. I think when I've supervised or mentored other professionals, I think two things happen. One is they go into it random. It's just whatever sounds like a hot topic, they kind of jump on it without really, and that's not a bad necessarily thing to start looking at, but there's research that has to come into it. Or they jump to something that just sounds sexy. It just sounds like, wow, this is a trend. And not that trends are bad. I think we always see trends in mental health. I'm old enough that they're now coming back, ones that came and went, and now they come back into play. But I caution people in doing that without really doing some research behind it and kind of going, okay, is this a specialty? Is this a niche area that we can go into that's going to have legs for us? And I think back of just some of our past guests who have really specialized in some unique things, right? Some things like Drea Letamendi, who I think was, who probably has one of the more unique niche areas, but she kind of crossed a need and her passion together. And then really, but when you hear her talk, I think what was really impressive in the interview with her was it wasn't this just random thing. She did research. She put together a plan. She started this kind of sequence that led her to, really do some cool things. Who would think a psychologist or mental health professional consulting on movies and comic books, different specialty than maybe a patient population, but she's even, I think, found a way to bridge that pretty elegantly within her clinical practice. So that's one. I know Ari Tuckman's another one you've talked a lot about.
Yeah, no, and then Ari Tuckman has been on the podcast as well as on the CE site a few different times at this point. And I remember, I think it was our first conversation with him when he was sharing his backstory, and he talked about how working with the adult ADHD population, but seeing that there's this really important connective element of it with sex therapy, and then also the couples therapy. And so, and then I think he even goes on and talks about how there wasn't any research done. So he took kind of this, amalgamation of these areas and said, okay, how do I work to make an informed research to just try to get some data that we can actually make some claims that we can back up versus just keeping it purely theoretical there. And so kind of, again, that emerging pattern, recognizing a need. Yeah. And I think, maybe along with the pattern recognition, and maybe I want to call this that's the first half, but the second half, I think, is also, it needs to align well with us.
Sure.
And I'm going to maybe pick on you for a moment from the conversation we had last time where, shared, couples are not your thing.
Right.
So even if there's an emerging need, a pattern, recognizing fit for ourselves in terms of like, what is this topic and what is this area, and I think that there's an element of, we need to be thinking of like, cognitively, does it capture our interest? Because if this is something we're going to be investing in, we want to make sure that it's not like just dry and, parts of it might be dry, but like that it's just going to be mind numbing, because, do you really want to invest in something that's going to feel mind numbing for you? I think emotionally being able to make sure that we can sit with this population or sit with the complexity of what's going on. And so we might really want to support trauma individuals, but if it's something that we really struggle with sitting and hearing, that might not be our area of focus or specialty. Right. And then also I think just our own natural skills and being able to make sure that there's a compatibility element of that. So, am I able to bring this in and really integrate it well with my work, or do I need to drastically change things? Whether that's, if I have a 45-minute session and I'm not able to really scratch the surface of something, and within the 45 minutes, is this really going to be an area that's going to fit well within my practice here? Mm-hmm. So, and like, that skill element of integration, but also I guess also maybe a fourth piece to that is also the way in which we're able to hold and conduct sessions, I think, is another element that we need to be mindful of.
Right. You're right. It depends on where we're practicing. It's, agree. I like those four pieces. I mean, I think for me, it's, maybe the part one we talked about the patterns and the interest piece of part two here kind of go hand in hand. I mean, I think the other thing, a lot of the interests I've gone into started with a cognitive interest by, I love to read. I think I've said on the show before, I read a journal article every day. It's just the way I don't know, it's my training. It's just kind of what I've done. I find them all pretty interesting, but not all of them would I want to be a specialty. Like there's some where it's like I read them because they help in my general practice. And that's about as far as I'm taking them. Yeah. Like that's it. So so we can develop patterns, but I think you're right. Like, is it sustainable? And I'm glad you mentioned about trauma, because I think trauma is one where, again, doing supervision with people and mentorship, I hear people that have a calling to that. And I get it. Like, I mean, we're a helping profession and it's a population that needs help. But I've also found that if it wasn't right for just their emotional tolerance or just them being able to sit in it, it's created burnout for them. And so while they were passionate about it and interested in it, it really didn't fit them as a person. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think like we do have to know ourselves. I think we, on a smaller scale, like I remember when we've talked about grief, where we've said like, listen, there are times in my life I've had to go, all right, I'm not going to do grief work right now. I'm not in that space. And that's okay. I mean, I think we have to know those pieces, or somebody who, might be interested in couples therapy, but maybe they're going through a divorce. That might be a tough situation. So I'm glad you called that out, because I think sometimes our passions and our personalities may not always align, not perfectly. I like doing trauma work. I find it interesting, but I know that like I don't have the tolerance that I could do that 7 or 8 sessions in a day. Like I think for me, that would be a challenge. And so while I think I have the skills and the competency and the interest and the passion behind it, I also have to know how to balance that piece of it. So I think that internal alignment is kind of a real interesting piece we don't talk a lot about, but it's important that we kind of ask ourselves those questions and throughout the process.
And there's a part of like both with to support the populations that we're working with well, but I also think in terms of like our capacity to conduct the skills well. And, my thought goes to like, talk about Ari Tuckman and, part of that being, with sex therapy, I think there has to be a tolerance and a willingness to talk about maybe some taboo conversations or topics that maybe not every clinician feels comfortable with, in a way. And so being able to kind of assessing our own values and like those elements of fit to say, hey, like, is this something that, can I go there? Can I have a conversation without, biases or other elements of it coming in and having an impact that's not going to serve the client well, in a sense. Yeah. And so I think, not both with like the heaviness and like the act of, but also our capacity to even engage with those skills that are necessary there, like to conduct something well. Like, if someone is trying to engage in, I would say, more of like a religious focus, with the therapy practice, but if they are an atheist, that might be a difficult topic or a difficult conversation to have.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting. When you were talking about that, it made me think of, I had a really early in my career. I mean, we're going to go, 30 years, at least 30 years back. I had a supervisor who was quite brilliant. And when we would get, this was early where I was trying to get exposed to a lot of different areas. So this is not really a story about expertise, but it's a story about preparing ourselves if we're going to do that. And so I was working at a place that we had children that were victims of sex abuse. And we're in our supervision session. He's like, you're going to have this referral. This is the situation. And he's like, I'm going to say words and I want you to say them back to me. And I was like, okay. And he said, penis. Kind of looked at him and he goes, no, you got to say it back to me. And I said it and he's like, vagina. Penetration. Like he's saying these words and I'm repeating them back. And he said, listen, you have to practice it. Like it's because you're going to be with someone who, if they say something to you and you make the faces that you just made to me, we're going to shut them down and we have to create a comfort level for you. And it was such a powerful moment. And I'm really giving the abridged version of it. But what was really interesting was like, it was the first time I think in my career I had somebody who made me really think about the granularity of the skills in which we partake, right? Like these things that we have to do. And he said, if you're not comfortable with it, then this isn't going to be the right thing for you to do. And so we literally in supervision session would practice saying words and he would say phrases and I would say them back and we went back and forth. And when I was comfortable enough going into that session, not that it wasn't hard, but I was mentally in a different place to do it. And so when I think of specializing later on, I agree. Like I step back and kind of go, is this something I can kind of talk through and do those things? And that's even part of building this specialty, like, really getting the language. And I have had other situations where I knew someone was going to come in and talk about something and I would self-talk in my office and get myself practicing to say things. And that maybe sounds really, kind of over the top, but it's just how important I think thinking through all these little variables are.
And, along those lines, like, and this is just more of an example personally of, I'm really grateful that my program, we didn't practice saying like, penis or vagina, but the practice of needing to tolerate silence and like the desire at times to fill it, but being able to say, when there are some really heavy moments, how do we not just follow it up with another, like giving it presence? And so it would be, we were encouraged to have a personal self-disclosure, but if not, just sharing a hard, just sitting, just staring at someone. And it wasn't just like, but it was like sitting with the heaviness of the comment that was just made.
Right.
And is there a way to demonstrate with your body, like just like the level of understanding, but also knowing when do we move forward from the silence as well, because that can be a difficulty in and of itself as well. If someone's lost for words, if they're waiting for you and you're waiting for them, a lot of session time can slip by in silence. Sure. So there's kind of that, the dual side of that.
But that's another great example though. I mean, I know that's, we're talking about specialties, and we're talking about some early skills in our career. But I don't think it changes when we get into specialty, right?
No.
It's just, it's just a revision. Like I remember the same exercise. I remember being in class, and that was part of our class where we sat in silence and we would just look at someone, and it's a skill. I mean, it's something you practice, and it does get easier. And it's, but I remember the first time being kind of uncomfortable, and maybe, the two of us looking at each other and kind of making faces like it was, So yeah, I don't think that changes. Like, I mean, I think maybe part of this developing specialty is sometimes going back to our roots. How did we learn the skills that we have that are our general skills? It's almost a similar process, I think, as we specialize. And, we're giving some real detailed levels. But, for those that are like psychologists that do testing or school psychologists, it's if you're giving a new test, it's the same process. You're going to learn it. You're going to practice it. You're going to pretend you're giving it. You're going to give it to somebody who's not a real patient. And it's that process of kind of going through to develop that skill level. So yeah, I like the idea of trying that alignment piece. That's important. And now a word from our sponsor. PAR's AI Report Writer is an AI-boosted tool that generates comprehensive reports, including interpretations and recommendations based on scores from a wide range of popular assessment tools. Spend less time on report writing and more time supporting students. Learn more at parinc.com/AI. That is parinc.com/AI. And now back to our conversation.
And, as we're talking, like, I think like that, the dual component of recognizing the pattern and recognizing a need, or at least a use for a skill. And then also that this self-reflection on like, what is my capacity to be successful with it in a sense? I think that there's also an important element of it, that it's anchored in a theory, and ideally it's a theory that we feel well versed in. But, even if we're exploring a new theory, but like letting there be structure, and we're not just kind of, again, like jumping around like a theoretical progression, I guess,
Sure.
so to speak. And I think that's a really important piece of like, what is the model that explains, the mechanisms that I'm being exposed to in this. So, if I'm taking like an ABA training that is very like behaviorally oriented there, but if I have like a really like person-centered existential background and I've never touched ABA, and that might be like, why would you, why would you say like, so I don't want to encourage individuals to stay solely within a single theoretical focus. I do think branching out, but we have to ground it somewhere and not just letting it be its own just floating skill set, because then it just becomes, I don't want to say like a party trick, but we don't really see the progression of how what we're doing is working, or being able to notice that nuanced detail. It's just, I was told I need to do this in a training, so I'm doing this. We don't really know the reasoning behind it, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think, again, these kind of connect together. I think even going back to the alignment piece with this too. So like, does it align with who we are as clinicians theoretically? I oftentimes will say that I'm theoretically focused, but I'm technically eclectic, meaning that I view most activities that I do through a cognitive behavioral lens. That's my focus. Whether I'm testing, whether I'm doing therapy, whether I'm consulting, that's my lens. But technically, I'm going to do some things that are outside of CBT that I can integrate within that theoretical kind of progression. And, I'm a member of the Society of Psychotherapy Integration, which really is their focus as well, that, there are some great techniques that we can learn and develop some kind of expertise around, but they may not be part of our typical kind of CBT realm, you know, I mean, it's, or whatever orientation we are. So yeah, I like that idea of having an anchoring and really knowing the foundation. And it brings me back to one of our first episodes with Bob Friedberg.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're thinking the same thing. Yeah. It's like where he talked about, like, you know, we have to kind of build that foundation, and then, yeah, let's go into different areas. So, you know, maybe as a grad student, we're following a very technical manual style treatment, and then we're modifying and doing some more creative approaches later on. So yeah, there's a lot of ways I think we can look at that.
And, you know, it's something I appreciate, and this is, I'm kind of taking something I've heard and adapting it a bit, but that when you're talking about that eclectic approach, it becomes more of an extension of the theory rather than a departure from it, even if it's housed within a different theoretical framework. And back to Bob Friedberg's episodes, so many quotable moments in that episode. If you haven't listened, go back and listen to Bob Friedberg's episode.
It's a good episode.
But when he's talking about what Tim Beck says of, you know, tell me what you're doing and I'll tell you how it's cognitive therapy. There's
great,
you know, as long as it has that framework in mind, like you can depart and that is okay. And that's how the theory grows. And that was, you know, Bob's, I think, one of his phenomenal contributions in, you know, cognitive therapy is being able to then adapt it for children in that way. Yeah.
And I think we've seen that as a profession really over time. Like, you know, I mean, I think just using something like play therapy. Play therapy is a very general word. And the play therapists I see who are some of the best are grounded in a theory. But whatever that theory is, play is the medium at which they're doing it. And but you know, I was lucky when I did my doctoral training. You know, I was very CBT focused. That's kind of our program. And then I go to my internship and have a wonderful supervisor who was like, hey, we're going to have you do object relations play therapy. And I went like, oh, okay, this is way out of my realm. And it was super challenging, but it was such a great experience to kind of get into a different kind of modality. And that 3 months didn't make me an object relations therapist, even though I had great supervision. It was intense work, good work, felt good about what I did during that time with kids. While that didn't become my expertise, it did make me a better cognitive behavior therapist. Like, you know, so those principles I brought back into my theoretical orientation, and I've leveraged them many times over the last 20 plus years of being able to kind of pull those together. So that's an area where, you know, maybe I never got to the point of expertise, but I was able to really immerse myself and take challenges and look at things through a different lens, but then reintegrate that back into my core as a professional.
Yeah. And, you know, I think I'm grateful you shared it that way, because that, you know, not everything that we're doing needs to be for the focus of expertise, but rather like there is value in skill accumulation as long as that skill accumulation has a purpose in place within what we're doing. And I guess it is just more of like the aimless skill, like, you know, I'm going to randomly choose whatever training is on the top and that's the one I'm taking. How are they connecting? And like, that's, I guess, that piece of it I'm wanting to kind of communicate is making sure that there is this, you know, this web. And you know, another past episode, and like, it might be a little bit of a stretch, but I'm thinking of the way that you and Ro, when you were talking about the role of relationships within CBT, like the relationship works through the theory. It's not like a part of the theory. It's integrated in every level. And so how do we kind of keep that thread, like that through thread with what we're doing? And we can take it in any direction, but there needs to be a connection that's there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like when you said the web too. I mean, I think that's kind of how I look at, you know, my almost everything I do is these, you know, these threads of the web that connect each other and they go through each other. And but the web as a whole is my theoretical piece. And then the rest of it integrates within that, which I think is important. And, I think, yes, I like the idea of trying out different things. And again, maybe they don't lead to expertise. Maybe they do. Maybe it is something we take a little bit further. But, one of the things every time it's about 3 months before license renewal, when I am on Facebook or some professional thing, when I see people going, hey, I just need to find a workshop to take so I can get 3 credits. And the learner in me cringes at those moments and kind of goes, wow, like, is that the way that we become professional that we want? That we're just kind of, let's just take the thing off the top. Let's just do the quickest thing that I can get the credits so I can stay licensed. And I've just never approached my career like that. And I know good therapists who do. I mean, I actually have many friends who that's how they live their CE world. But for me, I've always been like, wow, this is an intentional moment that if we really think about it, we can really put a progression in place that will give us expertise, will give us specialization, and will keep us fresh in a different way. Like we can make this alignment happen. And then we're not haphazardly just doing workshops and checking boxes. We're really trying to figure out, is there this, skill acquisition that we're going to kind of try to put together for ourselves?
And, I think, and I don't want this to be too self-promoting, but like that again is one of the biggest pieces where like with Site to Practice, trying to take it to the learning platform there and, for clinicians to be able to use and the subscription element of that, because,
Sure.
Trying to keep it at that approachable price point. But, if you are scrambling, can you scramble with a little bit more intention rather than just what's the cheapest or what's immediately available there? So it has some more meaning or value than, just this niche topic that just, again, is probably never going to be used and you just have on in the background anyway, you're not listening to. So like,
right.
Again, if we're investing, like how do we really use that with an intention? And I think access is such an important piece there and, access to training. And I think, for us to really have a strong competency, we need more than just training, but it starts with training there. And I think, something that we're trying to do and expanding on, I think, as we are able to connect with new presenters or guests for the site there. But just one of those core pieces that I know personally, I've been in that position where it's like, oh, I don't, I have to paying out of pocket for it and things of that. And it's like, well, can I get this cheaper that's, potentially free? And once being in a position where I have greater ability to access financially, where it doesn't feel like it's as large of a strain, I wanted to lean in and it was just, again, like, so just when you do have that opportunity and you're thinking about what you're wanting, your skill set, like really also like that access piece, I think is such an important and like not pushing it off until the last month or 2 months before licensure's renewal. Yeah. Probably also a good thing.
Yeah. When I do, I think thinking ahead and like, I've shared I keep a 5-year plan that's continually, and it modifies, it goes through, but it does help me select conferences and things that I'm going to go to and find webinars that I want. And and even what I'm going to read. Like, I times will say, okay, I'm going to try this book because I want to learn more about it and see if it's something I want to go into. And to be honest, there's probably 70% of areas that I explore never even get close to being on the list to take further. I mean, it may even be 80%, maybe even higher than that. But I also love the exploration part. I think that's an important part. Going to like the workshops and things, I think, maybe this kind of next piece of this skill acquisition and it really being deliberate, just we're talking about workshops and, podcasts and all these different things we can do. But even just reading research, find a journal article to read and keep on your desk when you have 5 minutes. Listen to to podcasts, listen to YouTube videos from different people, anything. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can kind of start identifying patterns and starting to see different trends. I think of some of my colleagues, Dan Florell being one, Adam Lockwood, who's another person who we're going to have to get on the show here sometime. When AI came out, those two were so on the front end of it because they had already, before any of us were even thinking about adopting it, they had their ear to the ground. They were reading things about it. They were learning about it. And so when it actually started coming into the profession, like these two guys knew a lot. Like I remember like hearing them, both of them talking, going like, I don't know any of this stuff, And that all came from not just reading psychology literature, like they were paying attention to the pulse of technology outside of the field and knew it was coming. And then were able to really kind of be on the forefront, and they continue to be on the forefront of it. And now have been two people that, if I have a question, those are the two people I'm going to for expertise in that area. So.
And so, so not only the training and the research, but also where we can having that like consultation or supervision,
Right.
like really working with individuals that, these are known quantities for them, and like hearing their different ways and the different applications. And, if we can get into that would be phenomenal. But even, I think the podcast for me has been, while not maybe it's not consultation, but there's a consultative element to it, and being able to, share various practices and getting, feedback from some of the individuals. And, we've been very fortunate with having quite an extensive, but again, between podcasts and the learning platform for adult ADHD. And I'm just like soaking it up, and I'm like getting to ask questions that I'm personally curious about, and being able to well, what about this element of it?
Right.
I remember at the end of one of our trainings, I think I was moderating for Ari Tuckman, and I think on the podcast had mentioned about the role that, vitamin C can have. And actually we were able to kind of go, and it's like, actually, it's more citric acid, and talking about how that, impacts how the medication coatings are broken down and absorbed within the body for individuals. It is just like that type of information that I just would not have access to if not for this. So not that everyone's going to be able to go out and start a podcast, but being able to just reach out and communicate and asking questions. And I think just about every one of our guests that we've had on, when they're sharing their sites, when they're sharing the way they communicate and connect, that's what, it's an open door because they are passionate. They want to share the progression of what their area of focus is.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think that's something that maybe we all don't recognize how accessible. Again, maybe it's not going to be full supervision. That we don't have time necessarily for that for everyone. But I have found early in my career reaching out to people, they're all willing. Once in a while, you'll have somebody who's kind of, maybe not quite as personal. But, when I was doing CBT training, I shared this story. I think when Bob Friedberg was on the episode, I went to one of his trainings and then approached him and just said, hey, I'm really fascinated. I think it was his second book that came out that was a huge book in cognitive behavior therapy with kids. I was like, I love your book. I would really love to learn some things from you. And he didn't know me from anyone. He's like, here's my email, reach out. I'll answer any questions. And he did. He invited me to his office at that point. I got to sit and pick his brain for a while. We ended up writing some book chapters together. We've presented together. And in many ways, he's become a mentor. Maybe not direct supervision on cases, but gosh, I've learned so much, and it's enhanced my expertise in CBT. And so I think that, those people are out there. It's easy to reach out to them. It's one of the reasons I love presenting. I go and I'll have somebody who'll reach out, and it's consulting on one specific issue, but it still creates a connection with people, and something that I appreciate. And I get a lot of emails, and that's okay. I actually like them and really try to respond to all of them. So yeah, I think that's important. And then also, beyond that, recognizing other people in our professional network. I've had times where I, as a school psychologist, would reach out to other psychologists in the area. We would journal club together where we'd talk about different research, and we would kind of build on each other. So there's a lot of options to take the skill beyond just reading and workshops to actually getting some consultation around it.
And, I think it's, after we're kind of going through that process, there also needs to be this piece of like in our skill, like as we're developing these skills of like working to integrate it within our, the caseload, and like, whether that's shaping our caseload to be a bit more, leaning into these qualities that we can utilize this skill. And also being able to say, how effective are we as we're going through that? So like both like skill integration within our cases, and then that outcome tracking to say, okay, is what I'm doing actually creating a change? And, it's not going to be perfect, but, I don't want an individual who's going to say, I am a specialist in this. I've never once had someone come in and say that, it's resolved or improved, but I've done this level of training. I've dedicated all of this time. Are we really then a specialist if we're not able to apply? Like,
Sure.
And so like, there's these different pieces to it that I think are such an important element of it. And parts of it, we can kind of jump around the ordering, but, I think we need these pieces to really kind of round ourselves out to develop that competency to some of these new skills.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, not to go on kind of a whole tangent about it, but, I think we're in a phase where you can get a certificate for anything in the field of mental health. Attend a workshop and get something that says you're certified or whatever it is. And I've always found that kind of troubling because I think it's so confusing to the public, and I think it's unfair to the public when we don't really do all the work to say that we're an expert in something. And there's, again, a lot of ways to do it. But I mean, I like that you mentioned outcome tracking, and I think that's the hardest. I mean, it's not in the sense that, I always say, I've said this a million times when I do trainings is, every counseling case I have, I always say is an N=1 study. Like we're collecting data, right? We're collecting data to see, is it working? Is this helping? Am I the right fit? All of those questions. So yeah, we do have outcome data in that, but I think we also owe it to ourselves to even challenge it further. I don't do it as much now as I used to, just because I don't do as much therapy, but, I will periodically record a session and, with permission with the person. And I'll go back and do self-supervision, and I'll listen back and kind of go, okay, like, what was I on track? Like, can I be critical about my own skills? And I'll tell you, I'm harder on myself than anybody else's audio or video that I've ever watched. And because I'll go, oh my gosh, did I say that? Like, I can't believe, or wow, they said something and I missed it. Like I was so focused on the task, I didn't hear something, and it could have maybe taken our session in a different place. And I think if we want to say that we're experts, that we're like, I think those are the things that we need to do. Like we need to sit back and go, can I be critical of my own skills? And that's not always easy. I had a former supervisor who would say, hey, you're listening to your tapes, and I want you to find everything before I listen to them. And that's what got me doing it. And I will tell you, it was the most uncomfortable thing I ever did. It was to listen to myself. And honestly, I would say, like, I would cringe at times and go, oh man, this is just not great. But it helped me learn how to be a little bit more self-aware and self-critical of my skills, and also to do some self-supervision and to kind of go, okay, hey, I need to do this. I'll give one quick example. The last time I recorded myself, and it would have been early in 2025. Like I said, don't do it as much, but I had a case that I was struggling with a little bit, just was kind of not going the direction I wanted. And so I asked the person and they were agreeable. And we were stuck. Like we were just in a really stuck place. And as I listened to my tape back, I was haphazardly using motivational interviewing, but not with really good fidelity. Like when I listened back, I was like, oh man, I'm like, kind of half-assing it. Like I knew what I was trying to do, but from a technical standpoint, I was like, wow, I need to back up a second. And that was a moment for me where I was like, okay, I'm going to go back through the Miller book and just kind of read through and refresh a few things. And when I went into that next session, not that it went perfect, I don't want to say that, but it definitely went better, even to a point where like at the end of the session, the person said, he's like, yeah, this felt really good today. Like this really went, I was like, wow, okay, that's why taking it to the next level and tracking ourselves and doing this, I think's useful. But it's hard because we don't always have the time and it's not the most comfortable thing to do.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder, if we set that intention early, so that way it's not so much, let me find the time, but rather when is the time that I'm planning on doing this? And if, we have, taking like a somewhat of a SMART goal approach with it, do we have the specificity, the,
sure,
all those qualities to it? Is that then helpful where it becomes then integrated into a bit more of a routine element? If it is like,
right,
once a year, whatever my, I'm going to pick a week and one of my sessions on here, I'm going to do that. Or if it's multiple times, what's
right,
my frequency that I'm doing? Is it the same session? I'm kind of tracking longevity there, or is it wanting to kind of pick difference, within this population? Do I want to kind of have like a smattering of those pieces there to be able to reflect back on? But I think that's a really great piece. And when you said that, not having the time, I have this conversation with a lot of my ADHD individuals of, it's not so much about trying to make the time, it's about planning the time. And, I was like, you are here in this session. If I were to ask you, go and find an hour to sit and talk with someone, you're not going to find, where in my schedule am I going to fit that in? But we book ahead.
right.
And so, when you're looking at your calendar, you're saying, well, I'm not available that time because you've already accounted for it. And so how do we then work to make some of those more challenging, difficult things a higher priority in that sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, it kind of makes me think back, when I tell people I read a journal article a day, I often get funny looks and I don't have time. And I'm like, it's kind of funny. Like I've done that nearly my whole career. So since 1997 was, I was told to do it and I kind of did it. So I can go back. I know the conversation. But what's interesting is, to me, I don't recognize it as a challenge because it's now habit. But what I do is I start every day and I take 10 minutes, and literally before I do anything else, my computer's booting up. I read for 10 minutes. Then at lunchtime, after I'm done eating, I come back to my desk and I read for about 10 minutes. And then usually at the end of my day, I'll read for about 10 minutes. Most often I can get through most articles in that time frame. Some not, some I have to reread because something doesn't make sense or whatever it could be. But then that's what I do at the end of my day, like end of the day, meaning like right before I go to bed. It's like, oh, hey, I have to finish this article. I don't think about it. Like, it's just now like, but it was something where I planned it. Like early on, I was like, okay, I'm going to do it this time. These are the times that work for me. And then it became habitual. So now I just do it. And even if I travel and I'm not in my office turning on my computer, literally, like I was in a hotel last week and I get up, I sit at the desk, I pull out my article. And on those days, it's actually good because I sit down and eat breakfast. I actually read the whole article before I actually left in the morning. But again, the habit of that's what I do in the morning. The same as I eat breakfast, the same as I make coffee. It's just what I do.
Yeah, you're not finding the time to make coffee or finding the time to brush your teeth. It's a part of our habit.
It's part of our habit.
Yeah.
It's that automate, right? It's that automate piece that we have to do.
And I think, to maybe come back into this process, I think it's also very important that we just don't take it at face value. And like, we really need to refine it down, and so as we're going through, we're applying this, we're testing, we're making adjustments, and we're really trying to kind of explore like not how do I, get the most out of this? Not everything is about optimizing, but to a level or a degree, like, making sure we're not just kind of taking maybe the concept as is and copy pasting it over, but we're really finding that fine tuning piece. And, it might be an individual who thought, hey, I want to work with ADHD. And as they're working with different populations and said, you know what? I think I really want to work with high functioning professionals with ADHD. That is where I really feel like I'm the most effective. Doesn't mean I won't work with others, but like, again, it's that kind of this specificity with it. Or if it's couples work, if like, I like working with couples, but really it's blended families, and trying to navigate step parenting roles. So like some of those pieces there of like, we can have the nuance there. And, when we have that and we are able to demonstrate that we've taken the time to build the skill well and effectively, now we're serving those target populations all the better. And, again, we become hopefully just a really valuable resource for them in that way.
Yeah. I love that fact. And I think I'm going to talk about that and then do a little side of that. But, I was thinking I'm editing a book series, and I just got a book from one of our former guests, Megan Gierka, who does reading. And, she's a teacher, but she teaches about reading. Like, that is what she does. She's worked in public schools as a teacher and has done other things and taught, full subjects. But her specialty is reading, and she can spit out research and talk about, like, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I love kind of talking to her and her co-author, Nicole Normandy. Great. It's just a great book, but it's like, that's where it's refined. It's not, I'm going to be good as a teacher. I'm going to be good in reading, and I'm going to be good in early literacy and how that develops. So yeah, we can refine it. My other aside I want to mention is, I think at this refinement phase, there's also a little bit of an opportunity for an out when it's not the right fit.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. Like, I won't get into all the details, but there are things that I went, I think I'm going to do this. And I was excited about them. And I went down those paths, and I think I got decent at them, if not even good at them. And I hit this phase of, okay, I need to now really kind of tune it in. And I realized that maybe it wasn't something I wanted to take that level of focus on. And again, not wasted time. I think sometimes people can go, oh gosh, I wasted a year focusing on this topic. No, it made me better in a lot of ways. But it wasn't to the point that I wanted to refine it further. And it just became, so they're not things that if people look at my CV, I list as an area of expertise, but they're areas that I know quite a bit about, but I'm not going to say I'm an expert or it's my specialty because I never went that far in it.
And, I'm when you're sharing that, it reminds me of really just about every conversation we've had with someone who's talking about adult ADHD. When they're talking about how we identified or what some of those early markers that may have been that like led to it being missed potentially. And the one that stands out is that, rating scales from teachers that are talking about like, oh, like they do great, they get good grades, their homework's getting well, done well. And like, we can perform it, but also, asking those questions of how long is homework taking, and if on average it's taken everyone else 45 minutes and it takes, this individual 4 hours, right, what's the cost, and right. Like, so, as we're refining it down, like we maybe really, really do it well, but we have to also, again, have that self-reflection of what's the cost it's taking for me in terms of that. And,
sure.
I won't share names, but there's a clinician who specializes in trauma, and her and I will sometimes just talk about what we're reading for leisure. And I was sharing, I was reading some Stephen King, and she's like, I can't do that. I don't have, after talking everything I do throughout the day, I don't have the capacity for something like Stephen King. I was, wow, I never considered one of my favorite authors. I've quite a collection of his, and wow, what would it feel like if reading one of my favorite authors all of a sudden became something that feels far too heavy and I don't have the capacity for? So even if I'm, doing good work and that piece. So I don't know, just that food for thought of how do we make sure it is a fit, not only in practice, but also in our lived experience.
And not to regret trying it.
Yeah.
I think that's the other piece. I've heard people say, oh gosh, I shouldn't have done all this time. Of course you should. That's how we are able to determine. And I've never looked at them as a waste of time. Like I said, they've always been good, but it may not have been a good personality fit. And even now where I'm at in my phase of my career, I'm narrowing what I do. So things that even I did have expertise in, I do far less now because I'm doing other projects and working in some doing some other things. So that's a good place though, of kind of, we're either going to tighten it up or we're going to kind of go, okay, maybe I'm going to move on to something else and fill that space in another way.
And as we're maybe kind of coming down here at maybe this last area where I think it is important, we're talking about, as we're working to specialize. And, I think there's some pieces that we can look for and identify of within our professional identity, can we identify what is the problem that we're addressing? How are we doing that? What are the things that we're targeting? Who is the population that we are best able to work with and support? And what are those outcomes that we are really working to prioritize within that population? And I think those are pieces that when we can answer them confidently and consistently, it's maybe a sign that we're approaching expertise. Again, I really want to kind of be cautious because I think there can be that, as you said earlier, we can say, I'm certified or I'm, I'm a specialist. And, you shared earlier, and I'm blank, I believe it was Malcolm Gladwell who talking about the idea of expertise, but what for you, what defines or how do you recognize what is someone who has an expertise?
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think we really don't have a definition, right? Yeah. There's no, we don't have a specific definition yet.
Malcolm would not be happy with that.
Right. Yeah. Right. Malcolm Gladwell, I think, we were talking about I mentioned his book Outliers, that, and outliers are who these people that do these amazing things in whatever field they're in, and the gist of the book for those who haven't read it is that basically it's 10,000 hours of doing something. We develop this intense skill. So they look at pro athletes. They look at people like Bill Gates and, the Beatles, and what got them to this higher level. And he was like, we have to practice at 10,000 hours or exposed to it 10,000 hours. I don't know that that's realistic to track. But, I bet you if I took areas that I would say that I have expertise in, from reading to sitting in webinars to going to trainings to reading more to the practice, probably get 10,000 hours. I think that's probably in there. I think the best way to define it, I think that's an interesting way, but I think the best way is, did we go through a sequence? And if we're going to say that we have expertise, truly having a process of exploration, understanding research, hearing from other experts, whether that's webinars or whatever we do, consulting with someone who does have expertise in some ways, and whenever we can, having supervision around that. And in some rare cases, we may have a hard time finding that supervisor, but there's still ways to obtain it, and to do that with some time. One of my credentials is that I'm board certified in behavioral and cognitive psychology. So for those in psychology, they refer to it as ABAP, ABPP, the American Board of Professional Psychology. And there's different specialties in that. And so there's school psychology, there's forensic psychology, neuropsychology, but there's a sequence to get that. And I say, of everything I've done in my career, that was the most intense process, because it's having your internship hours documented, your postdoc hours. What have you done between those times? And that's just the first part of the application. And then you got to do a case study, and you submit videos and audio pieces and written components of cases. And then you have experts who review them. And if you pass that section, then you sit for an oral exam, and it's 3 hours of 3 people giving you intense questions and drilling you on your knowledge of research and all of that. I tell this story when I did my oral exams. I had my Apple Watch on, and for people who know me, I'm a generally pretty calm person. My heart rate monitor started beeping during the actual exam, because it was that intense, and not in a bad way. Like I will say, it was one of my best professional experiences. I did a little video interview about it just not too long ago, because I was like, it was such a challenge, and in a good way. And at the end of that, when you go through that whole process, they bestow a credential that you can say that you have a specialty in this area. I know we don't all have that process that we can go through, but we can create some plan around it for ourselves. Like, that's one way to do it in the field of psychology. But if a field doesn't have that process, then can we create a similar intensity for ourselves? And again, it's a word we throw around this show all the time, but it's the intentionality of it, right? Are we being intentional of how we're going to develop the skills, and how do we know that we've hit that piece of it? I think we can self-assess that as well.
And I think there's a lot to digest here, and I think having this process that can be such a value, but I think it can even start small. So you at home who's listening, if you're like, I don't know that I have a specialty, or what would I even be doing? Let's start back with that pattern recognition. What is a recurring pattern or a theme that you're seeing with the client population you're working with? And, once you have that identified, maybe it's asking yourself, what's the change that needs to occur that would support them? What's the training that I would take that would help to, make me feel a bit more competent or confident in this area? And then once you have that identified, hey, can we set a time frame, with it? So within 90 days, can I find what is the step I'm going to take, whether that's a webinar, training, a book, whatever, that's going to help me take this step. And, it is, this idea of specialization and becoming an expert, I think, is both enticing and intimidating, but we can make it far more approachable when we have a process in that sequence that we follow there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is, it's a good starting point for someone that wants to go deeper into an area. And, the main thing is just start somewhere with it.
Yeah.
That's the key. Like, whether it's reading or client patterns, whatever it is, start it, and then think about how we're going to go through it.
With that, thank you so much for joining us for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks, but until then, be well, stay psyched.